So when I'm out and about and someone has a watch on their wrist, I pretty much always check what it is. I try to do it subtly so they don't think I'm going to mug them, but this is probably something all of us watch people do. And over the years, I've noticed a few things. Casio owners are pretty much always fun dads. Omega Seamaster 300-meter fans, they want to be Daniel Craig. And Breitling owners, they're always up to something. So why is that? Let's get into this. Welcome to Doug's Watches, the thinking watch channel. Breitling, Breitling, it's all the same. A watch brand that is historic, founded in 1884 by one Leon Breitling. Having sold 100,000 units by 1910, the brand had become a serious name in the world of watches, and they produced their first chronograph in 1915. This was the first watch to feature an independent chronograph pusher at the 2 o'clock position. Although, like all watch brand claims, take that with a pinch of salt. Tag had been there with pocket chronographs earlier in the 1880s. So, like all things watch-related, it comes back to the inevitability of innovation. The idea that given the right conditions, certain innovations will just happen no matter what. They're a logical progression, so don't get so excited about them. But despite this, Breitling have been there throughout the history of the chronograph. In 1969, they were one of the first Swiss brands to produce a self-winding chronograph, working on the Caliber 11 alongside Hoyer, Buren, and Dubuis the Praz, a brand that I will never be able to pronounce correctly. They were also influential in the world of pilots' watches, forming the Hewitt Aviation Department in 1938, eventually providing chronographs for the RAF, leading to the launch of the Navitimer in 1952, which would eventually find its way into orbit in 1962. That's Breitling's claim to a space watch. Then, of course, the Superocean came later in 1957. Of course, the quartz crisis sees the launch of their Anna Digi models with the aerospace in 1985 and the emergency in 1995. And somewhere amongst all this comes the Chronomat, the Colt, the Super Avenger, Endurance, Top Time Premier, and I'm sure a few others that I have forgotten. They're an interesting brand, and under the direction of Georges Kern since 2017, I think they've started to change and become a little bit more interesting. But what hasn't changed are the watches that are out in the wild and the image we have of these. So Breitling have a unique challenge in my view. This connection to the Second World War and to the RAF, the Spitfire, is powerful, or more so, was powerful. Approaching this topic from the perspective of a young British person, the stirring patriotism towards the Battle of Britain is waning. I think that's a reason why I see Breitling on the wrist of those on the upper end of middle age. People who watched the Battle of Britain, A Bridge Too Far, A Great Escape, and the Bridge over the River Kwai on a Sunday afternoon when they were growing up, and not on the wrist of youngsters so much. The nostalgia of the younger generations is for another era, the 1970s and 1980s, but that's for another video. But Breitling is a bit more of a rogue choice in the world of luxury watches, even for this aging generation. It's a little I'm not like other guys, and definitely a little old-fashioned. I remember Breitling adverts when I was younger on TV and in jeweler windows. I noticed that they were using planes and pilots to sell their watches. I was like, cool, great, that's the brand. But they were surrounded by models, and in researching this video, I found these models were only removed from their advertising materials in 2018. This stood out to me because even in the early 2000s, using women to sell your products to men had become a little bit uncouth to say the least. Then I think to the men I see in the wild wearing Breitlings, and this old-fashioned way of doing things and looking at the world seems to be lurking beneath the surface of every owner. While I share this patriotism for the British contribution to the Second World War and nostalgia for the early jet-set age that we can possibly associate with Breitling, I struggle with the problematic parts of that era, and I think the Breitling owners I meet might not. Now, I'm not going to go into specifics of Breitling owners I've met, as that will get me blackballed in my non-YouTube life. However, in work, it's been guys that are structuring overly complicated deals that you can't quite figure out how they win, but you're sure they are in a weird way and that you're losing out. And out in Europe, it's been British expats who exclusively wear camouflage trousers. But instead, today, I'd like to tell you a story about a family member of mine, Dennis. Now, Dennis was born into a not particularly well-off British family in 1920. Somehow he managed to get the money to go to America, and through British charm convinced some Yanks that he knew how to fly a plane, and as a result, he got into crop dusting. In 1939, the Second World War broke out. He returned home, and as someone who now knew how to fly, he ended up as a flight sergeant, and in the cockpit of a Mosquito, somehow managing to survive the war. Now, Dennis used to go around with his top button undone, so people would think he was an officer. He would crash a plane somewhere in Scotland, only to be found crawling from the wreck saying it was quite the most untidy landing I've ever made. He'd borrow a Jag from a car park to return home for Christmas one year. He'd always have some mad money-making scheme that very nearly worked before leaving him broke again. But as he came to old age, he called it quits and married a lovely lady or two with a trust fund attached. A brilliant character and a fun story. But wrapped up in all of this is a sense of entitlement, regressive attitudes, and pride in the British Empire that many would struggle to express publicly today. And if he wore a watch, it'd be a Breitling, and you know exactly what I'm saying by that. If you watch the Watches of Espionage channel or read their website, you'll know there's this running bit that only sketchy guys wear Breitlings. There's a great article titled "Sketchy Dudes Wear Breitling, We Don't Make the Rules." But according to Watches of Espionage, Breitling is the watch of rogue CIA officers, SAS members turned mercenaries, and in film as well, with Leonardo DiCaprio in Blood Diamond. I can argue no differently. How do Breitling change this? Kern might be working to change this image by getting the brand's new watches all over YouTube, issuing vintage reissues like the Premier, and in turn copying how Omega and Tudor see such success with their vintage-like watches. For some reason, these don't seem to land, and don't get the reverence amongst the chronically online watch community, at least. This could, of course, come down to price. Breitling do often seem a tad expensive for what they offer. The endurance is nearly $3,000 for a quartz chronograph on a rubber strap and a bright light case, effectively meaning plastic. Superocean heritage ranges from £4,400 for the 36mm to the top of the line £8,550 Superocean heritage B01 chronograph. They're not setting their sights on Rolex by any means, but they are most certainly chasing after Omega. And that's the problem. By picking a Breitling, you feel like you're picking Sean Connery, or maybe even Roger Moore, and some will gravitate towards that, of course. But in picking an Omega, you're choosing Daniel Craig. It's different, it's modern, it's still the same character and potentially arguably less fun, and it is still looking backward. But it's different. Daniel Craig's Bond is an interesting one. It continues the discussion of the need for a now outdated man that we've seen throughout Bond's history. So Sean Connery, the leftover World War II veteran, Pierce Brosnan, the Cold War relic of a spy, now the Cold War is over. Craig's Bond asks the same questions as before, but also what of the man in modern society, potentially why it changes tone so much. However, it concludes with the need for a quiet stoicism that's accepting of difference and prepared to make sacrifice. I'd argue Omega's catalogue is possibly perfect for this, but then I am not a film channel, I am a watch channel, so let's get back on topic. Omega seems of the now, and Breitling that little bit outdated, and still behind everyone else. Not yet driving forward watches, chasing, not leading the pack. We can see this most clearly in their recent Superocean Heritage and Top Time releases. These are great watches, but I can't help but feel like Breitling are releasing watches to ride the passion for vintage styles. Only it's too late, the horse has already bolted. The Black Bay 58 launched back in 2018, and since then we've had vintage reissue after vintage reissue. It is now too late to pivot the brand. Combine that with the now outdated off-trend watches like your 46mm Super Avengers, and the brand is trying to cater both to this new emerging buyer of watches in the younger age range, but also those it did so well selling Avengers to, those who have that reverence for that era Breitling seemed stuck in for so long. And that means they don't cater to either buyer properly. Without doing new things, without making new watches that lead other brands, without securing new ambassadors, they are not going to reshape their image, nor will they lead the way. And as a result, Breitling will always be the watch for the guy you can't quite trust. Thanks for watching. If you liked my video, do please like and subscribe. If you want to help me make more videos like this, do consider becoming a channel member as well. Helps out just that little bit. I will see you all next time. Bye bye.